Welcome to Stop Overthinking, the podcast for overthinkers, people pleasers, and perfectionists who want to feel calm and confident enough to handle whatever life sends your way. I'm your host, Kristen Odegaard, a women's life and mindset coach, lifelong educator, and recovering perfectionist. Welcome back to this Stop Overthinking podcast. Today, I'm going to talk about one of the topics that I coach on the most, and that is people pleasing. People pleasing is such a huge topic, so this will just scratch the surface, and you'll understand why as I start talking about it. One of the first things that normally comes up is that people confuse people pleasing with just being nice. And that can look like not knowing how to say no to people because you don't want them to feel hurt, or maybe that you're only going to open up or ask for help when you're on the brink of a breakdown because you don't want to overburden people with your stuff. Or maybe you feel responsible for other people's reactions and you project your feelings onto them and try and rescue them from their own potential emotions. People pleasing can look like saying you don't care or you don't have a preference when you really do, but you don't want to be seen as difficult or high maintenance or have the conversation that may create conflict. People pleasing can also look like conforming to other people's standards and values when they don't match your own because you just want to be accepted, validated, and loved. And that is the core of people pleasing, wanting to be accepted, validated, and loved. It's hard to know where kindness ends and people pleasing begins, especially if you've never known differently, because you are constantly thinking this is what you need in order to survive. So I'm going to back up a little bit. And what we generally mean with people pleasing is that you are doing something to please someone else as opposed to it being something that you truly want to do and that feels in alignment to you. When you are people pleasing, you are doing it to avoid the negative emotion that you think you would have if you didn't do the people pleasing. So it's like somebody asked us to do something and we really don't want to do it, but we fear I fear what I'm going to think and feel about myself if I say no. So then I go ahead and do it. Sometimes it's more of a proactive thing, like the person hasn't actually asked you to do anything, but you're going to go out of your way to try and make them happy, to think good thoughts about you. You want to control how they're thinking about you and to keep them pleased and happy. So people pleasing is when we're trying to make other people feel good about us and like us and approve of us, but it's often at our own expense. People pleasing can feel really intense, and I'm going to do a little history here, partly because of just our evolutionary biology. So you may feel this to different extents, but we evolved from close-knit tribes, hunters and gatherers. And with that kind of tribe, you needed a strong social relationship and, group cohesion in order to survive. So if people didn't like you or you were ostracized or rejected or they didn't think you were a good tribe member, then you were not going to be safe and maybe going to starve. You needed those other people if you were sick or needed food. So we evolved and being very attuned to what everybody else was thinking and trying to be a good member of the community. And there's absolutely nothing wrong with that or being generous and doing things for other people. But then we also have this built-in sense of bias, like towards reciprocity. We don't want to be indebted to other people. That feels really uncomfortable. And we have all these social customs that go along with this. Like if you go to somebody's house for dinner, you have this sense that you need to bring something. Like if you don't show up, if you would show up empty-handed, then you're doing something wrong. Okay? Or if people come to visit you, you have to offer them something. So there's the strong need for reciprocity, but then people will also use this to explain away people pleasing that misses something really important, because people pleasing isn't reciprocal. So we think we need to do this because of our biology and to keep other people liking us and being accepted. But people pleasing isn't reciprocal. It's not something that I do for you and then you're going to come back and do it for me. It's usually I'm doing a bunch of stuff to try and make you think a certain way about me. And then when we're people pleasing, we can feel resentment and frustration and disappointment because they're not doing the same things back, or they're not acting the way that we want them to. Another way that we have been socialized and, evolution wise, is that we were wired, our brain is wired to keep us safe. And most of us, most of the time, are not actually in physical danger when we're people pleasing. There might be other occasions, and that's not what I'm talking about. But our brain recreates this intensity of experience that mimics the physical survivor of fear. So that's why people pleasing can feel so intense. And the reason I'm going through all of this is not to say that this is so ingrained that you can't change it, because you absolutely can. But I think it's really important to understand how deep and how we've been socialized this way, so that you can give yourself space and compassion and understanding, because changing it can be difficult. So it's not that I'm going to say, oh, you are people pleasing and that's bad and you just need to stop. And then you can't, and you beat yourself up and you think that there's something wrong with you. Like, why do I do this? I know it's wrong and I feel like crap, and yet I keep doing it. And theoretically, it's okay to say no to that assignment or project, or saying no to making cupcakes for the class, or turn down something that your partner wants to do if you don't want to do it. And it can seem so scary. And then we beat ourselves up about it and we don't understand what's happening. This is why it's happening. So the more you can understand the background, the more you can understand why it's such a hard habit to break, and why I say it's a deep, multi-layered sort of topic. If you don't know how to recondition your brain and your emotions, and you're just trying to force this override of a primitive fear that could feel like life or death or traumatic, your brain rebels. And it seems scary. So I don't recommend that you just leave it alone and continue to live this way. Okay, if you're operating from fear and anxiety and kind of moving all over the place and being unintentional in your life. Okay, because most of the time we're not really in danger. So if you are constantly people pleasing, you're in this constant state of stress, trying to control everybody else's brains, which you can't actually do. And that's going to lead to emotional and physical exhaustion and burnout. People pleasing, if it actually worked, would be one thing, but it doesn't work. There are people who are going to love you whether you people please them or not. And there's people who are going to be dissatisfied with you whether you people please them or not. And that's probably the same person, because we're all humans and we have all sorts of emotions. And there's no way to control everybody else's brain and what they think and how they feel about you. And what happens when we try and stay on that hamster wheel, when we're emotionally and physically exhausted? We snap at people, or we blow up, or we shut down. And it doesn't actually maintain the sort of peace that we think it will. One of the biggest costs of people pleasing is that you're not creating authentic connections, because that requires honesty and being your true self. So if you are people pleasing and feeling like you're giving, but you have less and less actual connection to other people, and you have less and less emotional safety because you feel alienated and lonely, you can't connect to other people, and you don't feel safe with yourself. You don't feel emotionally safe with other people, and you're constantly telling yourself that your safety depends on how other people think and feel about you. This is a terrible cycle, and it's making your self-esteem dependent on other people's validation, making your emotional safety dependent on other people's opinions of you. And that's never going to feel safe and stable because it could change at any time. The only thing you get out of it is that momentary reprieve from your anxiety before, as you say yes, but then all the thoughts and feelings come back around. And then you maybe even have given people a fake version of you to like, which again makes us maybe feel good in the moment, but it doesn't make any sense. If somebody likes a fake version of you where you lie to them about who you are, what you like, and what you are willing to do, that's not honest. It's not a true connection. And it just layers on the suffering. So there are so many problems with people pleasing. And it's deep. Besides all the evolutionary kinds of stuff, it generally was reinforced very early on. Children are dependent on their parents for their literal survival. So there's already this drive to keep your parents happy. And it doesn't mean that kids don't throw tantrums or say no or rebel even as teenagers. But there's an intensity to fear of being left and being alone or abandoned and not being accepted. So children are always wanting that attention, wanting you to pay attention to them. And if we are growing up that way, you will probably be a rule follower and learn not to offend other people. And you conform to your parents' desires so you can be truly accepted and loved by them. You don't want to rock the boat or make people mad. And then this is brought into school where it's can also be reinforced in social circles or appeasing other people's feelings. And it just continues to grow and grow. All right, so let's work on changing this. There are some steps that you can work on to stop people pleasing. What you need to understand is that this is a process. Okay, we already said how deeply ingrained this can be. And again, that's going to change depending on your family and your cultural norms and other things that make you uniquely you. But it's still a process. There are going to be some parts of it that are going to feel easy to change and some parts of it that are going to take longer. I just coached somebody earlier today and she was using thought work to deal with stuff and it felt easier. But then there was this thing that we've been working on now for months and months, and it was harder. And she was like, why is this taking so long? I feel like I've resolved all this other stuff so much more quickly. And I responded, right, because hard things take longer. It's like, not just a rut in the road, but you are in a trench, kind of digging yourself out. And that takes more time and effort. So embrace the process. And no, some things are going to feel easier and some things are going to feel a little bit more difficult and take more time. That's okay. Because you can either spend your time people pleasing, which doesn't feel good and builds that disappointment and frustration and resentment, or you can spend your time reinforcing new neural circuits and pathways towards changing them. All right, so one practical step, one of the first things to do is to practice to stop judging yourself and the process and to give yourself some compassion. Remember that curiosity and compassion as emotions are the opposite of judgment. You can't actually get curious about what's going on in your brain and why you're people pleasing and how it's coming out if you are judging yourself. So the more you judge yourself on why you can't change, why this is taking so long, why you can't just stop, why you keep doing it, the more you're going to think that you're unworthy, the more you are going to feel like you need to people please to try and get other people to make you feel okay, to feel that validation, to try and feel safe, and you are going to start the cycle all over again. Simply because you're judging yourself. As you are reflecting on why it is that you are people pleasing, you want to figure out what it is that you want this person that you're people pleasing to think or feel about me? It's beyond being liked or accepted. Like, what is it that you want them to think about you? And then the flip side of that is, what am I going to think about myself if I don't give in and do the people pleasing actions? So, for example, you might be afraid that if you say no to your partner, I don't want to go hang out with your friends from work. And your partner's going to think, oh, she's being so selfish. And you don't want to think that that might be true. So you just give in for one reason or another. Okay. And so you need to know what's going on in your brain. What is the thought that I'm trying to avoid? What are the thoughts that I'm trying to have I'm trying to have my partner avoid? Okay. Because we know that it's okay to not want to do something. I just have to be able to manage my brain around the other person's response. And that is a huge piece, managing your own thoughts. And that's really where having a coach to work with you on this process can be so helpful, because thoughts are going to come up. It's going to feel unsafe. It's going to feel emotionally unstable. And all of that is normal, but sometimes you need a person to kind of guide you through and remind you of that, to offer you other thoughts to think, to help keep you along the process. Because when you are in the middle of it, like, you don't see those other alternatives. The last piece that I want to offer you is using the values concept that I've talked about previously. I think I talked about it last week for decision making and in other episodes as well. Because people pleasing is actually a decision. We're making a decision about what we're saying, what we're doing, how we're showing up, how you're responding. And you can do that from the sense of trying to keep other people happy at your own expense, at the expense of your values and your priorities. Or you can do that considering what your values and priorities are. Because when you are locked into what's really important to you, you don't seek as much of that external validation from other people. It makes saying no easier. It makes staying in alignment with your values and priorities easier, because it just seems natural and normal. And this is what's important to me, rather than it being so important what the other person is thinking. Okay, now please hear me. This doesn't mean that you aren't a kind or a nice person. It means that you are actively, consciously, proactively taking part of your life, making decisions for what works for you and what you need. And that isn't selfish. That is dealing with all of the negative emotions, the resentment, the frustration, the disappointment that's building up in you because you're choosing to keep other people happy at your own expense. There isn't a right answer that's going to make all of this easy. Chances are you're going to be uncomfortable, or you have to be willing to go through with the process with the possibility that the other person might be uncomfortable. And that's okay. So, regardless of how you were socialized, what you were taught growing up, you can honor your needs, your priorities, and your individuality right now. I'd love to work with you in a personalized coaching program where I'll teach and guide and support you in detoxing from people-pleasing behaviors without feeling selfish, mean, or guilty. You'll learn how to determine what you need and what you want, and to make confident decisions that you are consciously bringing into your life, and what you don't want either. As always, I appreciate your support. Thank you for sharing this podcast and reviewing it so that other people can also hear what I'm saying and also be helped through this process. Have a great week.
Thank you for listening to the Stop Overthinking podcast with Kristen Odegaard. If you enjoyed this episode, please share it with someone else who would benefit from the message. To learn more about working with me and links to social media and free resources, head over to my website, coachwithkristen.com. That's Kristen spelled Kristen. Be sure to subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss future episodes. Have a great week.